Okay. For the third time. Okay. Okay. Bruchim Abayim. First of all, good Yom Tif. Kuntresim, I don't think maybe Kuntresim has. Not sure. No, it's in Peiches. Okay. Asar Shiyashvim. The Maimer of today. Okay. Bruchim Abayim. This year on Hilchos Shabbos, practical halacha, we're going to zero deeper into Hilchos Bishul. And before we get to the shir itself, we're going to preface the Maimer that the Frierdiker Rebbe asked to learn. I'm just going to bring a point from the Maimer that the Frierdiker Rebbe personally requested to have learned on Yud Beis Tammuz, the day of the Frierdiker Rebbe's liberation. And the Pashtus, the reason is because the Frierdiker Rebbe's Mesiras Nefesh was that Yidden should learn together, gathering children together. And the Frierdiker Rebbe therefore shared a Maimer, Tafresh Peiches, Yud Beis Tammuz. This is the first anniversary from Tafresh Pei Zayin. Frierdiker Rebbe was liberated from Kastrama, which eventually was the beginning of the end in Rasha Baruch Hashem. So the next year, the Frierdiker Rebbe shared the Maimer, which discusses the concept of learning Torah Barabim. And just to mention part of it, the Frierdiker Rebbe says that just like davening b'tzibur is mamshech beyond, we know that halachically a group of Yidden together have a din of a tzibur, and they as private people, so to speak, lose their individuality to the whole in a positive way. And therefore, for example, there's many applications to this din. Famous, the Rebbe quotes always in regards to Yidden that were oile regel, bisman abayis. So the din was that all the kelim of the Beis Hamikdash were tahor, because when the tzibur is there, so the tzibur doesn't become tamei, so to speak. The second Yom Tov was over. They would toivel all the kelim as if people touched it, that they didn't know what their status was, and we assumed them to be tamei. And the discussion at length, the Rebbe brings quotes from the Ragat Shaver, that when Yidden come together, they stop being Yechidim, they become a tzibur. They have a din of a tzibur. And similar to this, the Frierdiker Rebbe discusses that when a Yid learns together barabim, like we're doing here, it's a different limud. Even though many people would say on their own they could learn better, they could focus better, they could learn b'chabrosa, the limud derabim is mamshech. The Frierdiker Rebbe describes the Yud Gimel Mid Sarachamim, that's nimshach when there's a tzibur, is nimshach also when they learn together. And this is obviously reflects the Frierdiker Rebbe's Mesiras Nefesh. He explains that there's more dir b'tachtainim in a most practical sense. When Yidden come together to learn, it's a statement. It's what the community's at. So we have a lot to be thankful for to Rabbi Rotban and to Irgun Torah and to all the other wonderful organizations that daige that it shouldn't be, a person in his own loch sits and learns and does his thing. That doesn't reach rock bottom, doesn't hit the dir b'tachtainim to the same extent as when it's a statement that everybody knows this is what Chassidim are at. So it's special to chazah this Maimer, and it's special to learn together on this day of actually fulfilling what it's written in the Maimer. And kedai to learn the Maimer inside. So having said that, let's jump straight into Hilchos Shabbos. And last year we focused a lot on the meaning of the klolim. We discussed a lot of the klali Hilchos Shabbos. And today we're going to try to use those klalim halacha l'maisa. So, for example, in terms of making tea, coffee, we discussed concepts like bishul achar bishul, cooking. If something was cooked already previously, are you allowed to cook it again? And we discussed the halacha that davar yavish, according to all opinions, you could. A davar lach, a liquid, is not allowed to, according to the mechaber, to be cooked again. The Rama is lenient, and therefore he says, if it did not get cooled totally, then one is allowed to again reheat it. Then we started discussing Kli Rishon, Kli Sheni, Kli Shlishi. We discussed that in Kli Rishon, it's like cooking over the flame. It's tuldas ha'ur, which is just like the ur itself. Cooking in a pot of boiling water that you took it off the flame is just like cooking on the flame. If you cook something in that water. But Kli Sheni, be'etzem Kli Sheni is not mevashel. Aside from kalei bishul, aside from certain things that are cooked easily. Now, what's cooked easily is a great question. One thing is for sure that the Gemara clearly pointed out specific things that are mutter in a Kli Sheni. One of them was tavlin, shemen, mayim, and again? Yeah. So we brought there's machlekes apoiskim in regards to are we matir today's tavlinim, all today's spices. And we brought Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. However, the Alter Rebbe is much more mekel. And we're going just to go through today a whole bunch of common questions and relate to them one at a time. But before we do that, we're just going to have a look at a very fascinating video that Smichas Chaver program prepared for us in regards to coffee, how coffee is prepared, which is important for us to know because we'll note that coffee is roasted, but then afterwards goes through a form of a process which we would consider cooking. And therefore, there's opinions that one is allowed to put in a Kli Sheni. Even a Kli Rishon in India. Okay. Oh. 1 second, is there? Maybe we'll connect the speaker to that. There in a way. I'll just give the mic. Oh, perfect. Yeah, I'll start again. Good. Put it here. Degrees. They're still constant. Yeah.
70 tons of fresh coffee beans arrive from South America at this instant coffee factory every day. The raw beans are filtered down into large ovens where they're roasted at 200 degrees. They're stirred constantly to make sure they're evenly roasted without burning. From there, the beans fall down into an industrial mill where they're ground into a coarse powder. This plummets down into one of 8 huge coffee machines where the flavor is forced out by hot steam and pressure. The coffee is heated until it's condensed into an extract. And that's spread onto a conveyor belt which will take it away to the next station. The freezing hall, minus 50 degrees Celsius. To lock in the coffee's aromas, the extract must be frozen solid. At the end of a 30-meter long conveyor, it's broken up into granules. The deep frozen granules still contain water, which they need to get rid of. Stacked up on trays, they're driven through a low-pressure tube for 5 hours. The challenge is to remove the remaining water without the coffee becoming liquid again, as this would release the aromas. Here's how it works. The granules are heated at 60 degrees Celsius in a strong vacuum. Under pressure, the frozen water vaporizes and turns straight into steam. This is a process called sublimation. As the granules come out of the vacuum, they have been freeze-dried. The trays are flipped over and the granules fall into huge storage sacks ready to be packaged.
Tea comes from leaves picked from an evergreen bush called Camellia sinensis. Black, green, and white tea are all made from the same plant. The different colours and flavours depend on the climate and location that the tea is grown in, and then also in the way the tea is processed. First, the tea is dried. This process is called withering. They wither the tea by blowing warm air over the leaves. The withered leaves are then placed onto a conveyor belt, ready for the next step. This machine finely chops and flattens the leaves. Then a process called oxidation starts. Now the tea needs to be dried out completely. This oven is warmed up to 180 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes, and the water content reduces from 86% to 3%. It takes 4 kilograms of fresh leaves to make just 1 kilogram of dried tea leaves. Once the tea has been processed, it is loaded into 60 to 70 kilogram tea sacks.
When the tea master determines the leaves have sufficiently oxidized, they stop the oxidation process by tumbling the leaves in a gas-heated dryer for 10 to 15 minutes. This fourth step of the process is called fixation because it fixes the oxidation at the desired level. Then, and only then, does the final step begin, firing. They transfer the tea to an oven, in which it undergoes 3 drying cycles of 20 minutes each, at a temperature of approximately 100 degrees Celsius. This dries the damp tea, reducing the moisture content to the target level of less than 5%. The firing also brings out the fragrance.
So this is instant coffee. Huh? Yeah, well, they add, I guess they add certain tastes afterwards, but it just adjusts to the leaves that are already there, I think. Okay, so L'may nafka how they prepare it. L'may nafka. So I'm just going to put down two ground rules that we discussed already last week, and that's why that was Akdama to this week. If you notice the middle of the process of preparing the coffee beans, they put in a question, is that considered bishul? Now, what happens is they cook it. They raise it to heavy temperatures, and then they dry it. But the cooking, if that was already cooked, ein bishul achar bishul b'davar yavish. If it was cooked and it's considered dry, at that point you can even put it into kli rishon, an Indian, right? And therefore, coffee beans, first they're roasted and then they're cooked. They're frozen, they're crushed, and sent through a pressure tube to remove any of the remaining moisture. So we take out everything that it was cooked with, but at the end of the day, it was cooked. So most poskim assume that the last step of the pressure tube that we referred to is considered bishul, and therefore you could take direct water from a kli rishon. Again, if this is cooked and it's a davar yavish, you can pour directly from a kli rishon on it. Okay, even more than that. Okay, you may even I need to check that, but you may even be able to put it into kli rishon if you take it off the ur, because it's you're not allowed to put it when it's on the flame, that's mechzik kimevashel. That's a whole different sugya. You're not allowed to do things which seem like you're cooking, similar to marasai. But Chachamim made specifically about bishul. But if you are not putting it on the flame, you definitely can pour from a kli rishon straight onto this coffee, and therefore it would have been okay. However, the Alter Rebbe in the Siddur has a very interesting chumrah. Listen closely. The Alter Rebbe's chumrah in the Siddur is that something that dissolves and becomes lach instantaneously, we should refer to it as a davar lach. Very interesting. So you hear the word again. Something that is mitnames, something that dissolves straight into liquid, we should look at it like a davar lach. And if that's the case, even though it was cooked, but we are machmer that yesh bishul achar bishul b'davar lach. You can recook something if it's a liquid. It will be It will be considered again cooking if it was a liquid. It means, for example, if you have a cup of tea and it cooled down, you're not allowed to. Again, if it cooled down completely, you're not allowed to pour it into a kli rishon or pour a kli rishon into it because yesh bishul achar bishul b'davar lach. And the Alter Rebbe says one should look at this coffee as a kli, as a davar lach, because it dissolves right away. Ramosha is also machmer. He says you should use it in a kli shlishi because he's machmer that we shouldn't consider this even tavlin and not even use it in a kli sheni. According to the Alter Rebbe, you can definitely use it in a kli sheni. Again, according to the Alter Rebbe, you can take this coffee. A kli sheni is not mevashel lach. The Alter Rebbe holds that any liquids will not be cooked in a kli sheni. And therefore, even though the Alter Rebbe is machmer to look at these, this coffee as a davar lach, but in a kli sheni it would be mutter. Moshe is machmer that even in a kli shlishi, only in a kli shlishi you could put in this coffee. And the reason is because they quote that there are certain non-cooked ingredients that they may add afterwards to add flavor, and therefore that may have not been cooked. So obviously the safest is to consider it a kli shlishi. Now, that's the safest is a kli shlishi. According to the Alter Rebbe, the pashtus you can put it into a kli sheni because the Alter Rebbe, first of all, is mekel. The Alter Rebbe seems to be mekel that a davar, that anything that's considered a tavlin is mutter in a kli sheni, A, and B, all mashkin do not get cooked in a kli sheni. And therefore, according to Alter Rebbe, you could add milk also into kli sheni. Okay? The nafkamina, I mean, for us, it's no big deal to take a cup and turn it into kli shlishi. Where there is a nafkamina is, for example, if you're preparing for many, many people, tea, coffee in a big pot. So that's one nafkamina. The discussion we had last week was in regards to soup. And if the ladle sat in the big pot for a minute or for a little bit of time, I know that women have this klal. I need to check where it comes from. But if you already filled up 3 bowls, at that point, it's already loses the status of a kli sheni, this ladle, and it's considered like the kli rishon and doesn't take down the level of the kelim, right? That means if you had from the pot, it's a kli rishon. If you consider the ladle a kli sheni, then the bowl is a kli shlishi. But after filling up 3 bowls, the walls, so to speak, of this ladle, the cup of this ladle has become so hot that we won't apply the concept of kli sheni, which the whole reason why a kli sheni is a step below is because the fnus of mekareis, this walls already. So in that case, the bowl is a kli sheni, and if a bowl is a kli sheni, then we're back to this discussion. Can you add? So according to Alter Rebbe, you can add a tavlin. However, things that dissolve, for example, sugar, that we would look at it like a davar lach. Therefore, in a kli rishon, you cannot add it, even though sugar is fully cooked. Mitzad bishul achar bishul, the Alter Rebbe is machmir because he says something that will dissolve right away is considered already now a davar lach. Don't look at it like yabish, which there are other poskim that are more lenient. However, in a kli sheni, the Alter Rebbe seems to be mekel more in regards to anything that's considered tavlin. Now, this is in regards to no, in a kli shlishi, you're good to go for sure. So it seems like, according to the Alter Rebbe, it doesn't matter. You do it in a klisheni itself, the coffee, because the coffee was cooked. If this is true, that there are added ingredients that were not cooked, even that, according to Alter Rebbe, if it passes as tavlin, as a spice, then it would be mutter. But could be that coffee is not considered a tavlin because it's the ikar. I've seen poskim that hold that the coffee cannot be considered a tavlin. And therefore, if it's true that there are additional ingredients that they add to add artificial flavor, etc., that were not cooked with the coffee beans at the beginning, then better to do it in a kli shlishi. So this in regards to making coffee. Now in regards to tea, so if the tea leaves are raw, then you could put it into kli shlishi, because kli shlishi is not mavashal. I mean, there's the shit of the Yireim that if it's yad seledzba, but we don't paskin quite from kloli that way. And the Mishnah Berurah brings that if you pour boiling water on it before Shabbos and then you dry it, then on Shabbos you could pour in them hot water again. So that's similar to what's done in the process of making tea, and that should be l'chora simpler. The problem is, and that was the discussion that we saw at the end, that there is one of the ways teas are made is that it reaches a level of tzli. It's roasted. And in regards to roasting, there is a discussion whether yesh bishul achar tzliya is it considered cooking. And in that case, it's not so pashut. It's not as pashut to do that, a tea specifically. So therefore, in a kli rishon, one should not rely on the fact that these leaves were cooked already and now they're davar yavish, which is the heter that the Mishnah Berurah brings. If you cook them and then you dry them, you're good to go. That's true. But being that there's the second process, they show two examples of how teas are prepared, being that there's another form of preparing tea in which they're dried with directly from heat, and in that case it could be considered tzliya. In that case, it's not so simple to rely on the heter of the Mishnah Berurah of cooking it before Shabbos and then drying it. So obviously the best way to do it is with tea essence, and once it's tea essence, if it's liquid, if you go in Yerushalayim Shuls, what you'll find is like this. You'll find tea essence. That means they cook the leaves before Shabbos, and then they leave that on the flame, and then you can add it into your cup. According to the Alter Rebbe, you don't need that, because according to the Alter Rebbe, in a klisheni, you can add any liquid, not just water. Any liquid, Alter Rebbe is clear about that. Oh, so that already, that's the discussion we have over here. That it's better to put in a kli shlishi because of this second mahalach that it's tzliya. If it was for sure mevushal, then the Mishnah Berurah clearly talks about such a scenario. That's good. You're fine. A kli shlishi is definitely fine. You run into a different discussion about taking out the tea bag. That's already a problem of boirer. Okay, if you're taking out, right, then you could leave it. There are some I've seen that are lenient, and I didn't go through the sugya thoroughly, but I'll just mention there are some people that I see that take it out if they want to use it for someone else wants it, because then it's not pseilus. You're taking it out because that's what you want to give them, but it can't just be harama. You have to take it, otherwise it's boirer. But other than that, mitzad bishul, you're good to go in a kli shlishi for sure. That's right. That's the way the Mishnah Berurah paskins. There's no bishul in a kli shlishi, right? Okay. I'm gonna. So in regards to bishul achrafia, one should know that according to the Shulchan Aruch, there's no bishul. That means according for Sfaradish paskim, for Sfaradim, there's no bishul achar tzliya, and they're good to go. Okay. And there's a few things that play in. That's why it comes after our discussion earlier. Whether whether there's bishul achar tzliya. So from that perspective, the Sfardim are okay to put it into even a kli rishon. But do we consider, and then you're good even a kli rishon directly. But if it wasn't, or for Ashkenazim that paskin that side with lechatchila, there is bishul achar tzliya lechatchila. So then in a kli rishon you can't put it, but you may be able to put it into a kli sheni. Roasted means it was without it was from a heat of a flame without water. Yeah. So no, because cooking is in water, and for example that they brought over here, you see mamish that it captures the moisture and it bakes it, and then afterwards they dry it. But the process of cooking it is with pressure cooking it, as opposed to one of the ways that they prepare the leaves is pashat roasting, is pashat drying them out directly without like taking out the moisture. Now,
flying heat doesn't mean cooking has to be with water. Flying heat doesn't mean cooking has to be with water.
Correct, or at least in its own moisture. So I'm going to bring a few halachas. I was asked to take what we learned last week and bring in halacha l'maisa. So we're going to go through with one of the lead poskim today, and I just give a plug in. Rabbi Farkash is a phenomenal. His farm are phenomenal. On Hilchos Taras HaMishpacha, Tarak Halacha. It's like, in Chrome, you could look under the hood. So in addition to there's many malaktim sfarim, many of them, and they're important, but you want to know who they're relying on to know that it's the psak for us. Like, for example, learning Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, so we know it's clear to everybody knows that Shlomo Ganser relied primarily on the Chayei Adam, which is not a Chassidish Paisik, and that's why the Mizgeres HaShulchan added all his footnotes to add the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, and the Friedrich Rebbe said to learn Kitzur with Mizgeres specifically. Lamai said today they brought in Alter Rebbe's Psakim, but you want to know who you're siding with. So the Rabbi Farkash's Sefer is really Sayin in Tarak Halacha and Sayin Hilchos Shabbos, which he put out 4 Sfarim meanwhile. And the malachas that he did is phenomenal. First of all, it's halacha l'maisa on top, but you really have the whole back and forth. Under the hood, you have it's like lahav d'alfaf abdul riber it's chilukim. Like in Wikipedia, you could go in and see. I don't know. That's what I heard. I never saw it, but they say you could go in and see the back and forth discussions about each word. Like what was the havamina? His siyunim and aris and biurim are phenomenally clear, and I'll go through like why he sided this way and what other poskim that paskin otherwise who they're relying on. Really, really fabulous. So now using everything we prepared, let's have a look at halacha l'maisa in the words of Rabbi Farkash. So speaking of preparing coffee and cocoa, he says, first of all, on the most simple level, it's just applying all the musagim that we learned. So first of all, you want to make sure that the cup is dry. Because if you're filling a cup from an urn, the urn is a kli rishon, and if the cup still has water inside, you're cooking the water directly in an ira mikli rishon, and we said ira mikli rishon is mevashel. So you have to make sure the cup is clean. Now, poskim rely on the fact, and the Alter Rebbe quotes this, that you should shake out the cup hard and you're good to go. Okay, clearly brought in poskim. You don't need to make sure it's completely dry because it's psikresh loynechale, doesn't want it, and you could run into a problem if you decide to be machmer and dry it because there's a problem with schita if you start pressing with inside. So don't touch that. Okay, just look at the cup. It's clean. It has water inside. You shake it b'koyach, and then you move on. If the fact that there's a little bit of droplets in there, you could rely on the fact that it's already mevushal. The droplets that are in there were already cooked, and be'etzem, according to the Ramah, in a davar lach, there's no bishul achar bishul if it didn't become completely cold. So you're relying on the Ramah and you're staying away from schita. You're in good hands. Then he says the following in regards to adding sugar and milk. Okay, and what I'm reading to you is halacha l'maisa. Okay, and it's based on everything we learned till now. So sugar and milk, min adin, you would be able to put it into kli shlishi, into kli sheni already. Why? The sugar is considered a tavlin, and the Alter Rebbe is matter all tavlinim, unlike Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is machmir. He says the tavlinim of today are not necessarily the tavlinim of Amol because they're very thin, and maybe they are kalei abishal. The Alter Rebbe is clear, and therefore in Indian you would be able to add the sugar and because it's like a tavlin, and you would be able to add the milk because any liquids, the Alter Rebbe is clear, not just mayim, any liquids could be added in a kli sheni. And and that's even though there's much more ha'order and the cholov that he's adding is just a little bit, we still consider it like mayim, and you don't even have to use this svara. According to, I'm just going to put this in here. According to other poskim, some poskim don't paskin like the Alter Rebbe, but they say that we're only matir mayim in a kli sheni, not all liquids. The Gemara said mayim. The Alter Rebbe is clear all liquids. According to them, they have to rely on the fact that the milk was pasteurized, and b'meila was nizbash already, and b'meila aim bishul achar bishul ayitz adavar lach. They're mitzad of the fact that the Ramah is mekel and lach bishul achar bishul. Ifrat and a kli sheni that's not mevashel, both of them together you could add the chol. The Alter Rebbe you don't need that. In India you could add the sugar and the milk in a kli sheni, and that's good halacha. Oh, 1 second. But the coffee and the cocoa is different than the sugar and the milk. Why? Because what is tavlin? Tavlin is a spice that you add to something that's being cooked. And that's one of the reasons to this whole kula of kli sheni. We brought 2 reasons why we're making kli sheni. For those that remember last year, one reason why we're making kli sheni is because kli sheni is not mevashel, only if it's kalei abishal, but otherwise kli sheni is not mevashel. And then we brought another opinion that holds, it's from Rishonim, that the Alter Rebbe quotes, that kli sheni is not mevashel, period. The only reason why we aser other things in a kli sheni is mechzik mevashel. And tavlin and spices don't look like you're cooking something new. You're just adding something. In that case, it doesn't look like mevashel. Cocoa and coffee, it's not a spice that you're adding to a cup of water. This is going to be a cup of coffee, okay? Right? Very hard for that to pass as a tavlin. Sugar, yeah. Sugar, people drink coffee without sugar. People drink coffee without milk. Like I see a whole bunch of people in the crowd. Like we don't do that, right? So that can pass as a tavlin, sugar for sure. Chalav, you don't even need the header of a tavlin because chalav is liquid according to Alter Rebbe. But coffee and cocoa, that Rabbi Farkas says that's very hard to pass as a tavlin, and therefore they have to be in a kli shlishi or al kapanim irimi kli sheni. So you don't have to pour it into kli shlishi and then add it. You could put it right. I mean, as long as you're putting it either directly onto the kli shlishi, or even if you're putting it into the kli sheni, which works if you don't have a spoon to mix it with, right? So the simple solution, alach sidim tuin, is you put it into the kli shlishi and you take the kli sheni and pour it directly onto it, and it dissolves, okay, from the pressure. That's also mutter. Ira of kli sheni is very like a kli shlishi.
So then what makes it problem is not. So it's not if it dissolves in the first, just you're adding it. It's just a matter of.
Again. Sugar is considered a tavlin.
So it's not that whether or not it dissolves.
Okay, so that was an explanation. The reason let me go back a step. It's good to point this out. This shear is an interesting shear, but wow, this is the Mizgeret. I'm just gonna say this. Be'etzem, it's part of Smichas Chaver program. So we're going a little bit under the hood. Because it's also the summer program, so I'm trying to do it lamaisa. But we're going back. The reason I mentioned the fact that sugar is cooked before is because there are those that are matir even in a kli rishon. If you consider sugar cooked, if you consider it now a yavesh and it was completely cooked beforehand, as they have a fascinating video showing how the whole process of sugar is prepared, so then Ein bishul achar bishul b'davar yavesh. You could put it directly in a kli rishon if it's not ala ur. But being that the Alter Rebbe is machmer, that something that dissolves into lach becomes lach right away, we cannot rely on that head to put in a kli rishon. We have to put in a kli sheni. But the Alter Rebbe is mekel in tavlin, unlike Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, that is machmer. Many places are not, don't side with Rav Shlomo Zalman in this. Kli shlishi, sugar and milk and kli sheni already. The whole kli sheni. In a kli shlishi, you could do anything. Like you quoted before, no bishul on kli shlishi. Right. Okay. He does bring an interesting part that if the water in the klisheni are much hotter than yatzid led, this by dachtzot, this is a part that comes from the Chazon Ish. So there are people that are not happy to put into such a klisheni. There's I think the mucker is the I can tell you exactly where it comes from. Give me a second. Kli shlishi is definitely good. That's hands down. But kli shlishi we don't paskin like the Yireim. Kli shlishi is definitely the Gris Moshe. Everyone's sides that we don't paskin like the Yireim, and kli shlishi is okay. I'll just, for the sake of it, I'm just gonna for a second look at the give me a second. Okay. The kids are ambati that's cham b'yoser is there are people that are machmer in if it's much hotter than yatzid led this boy to consider it stronger than that, but a kli shlishi you're definitely okay. Now Nescafe, which is not like Turkish coffee. This is Turkish coffee. We said already. In Indian, okay, because instant coffee. There are people that are matter in a klisheni, but the way we explained earlier, it's pasik to be machmer because it's not considered a tavlin, and because the Mishnah Brewer brings the heter of cooking it before and then putting it into a klisheni. But the problem with that is that, like we said, today there are different processes, and some of them may be tzliya. And if there's tzliya involved, we're machmer, that it is called bishul again. Okay, let's move on to tea. Okay, tea. The tea leaves and sugar are both considered tavlin l'shita same. Okay, and therefore you're allowed to put it into a klisheni. Into klisheni according to the Alter Rebbe, but you're not allowed to pour on them from a kli rishon. Because kli rishon is mebashal. And if you take herbal tea, which is not stam tea leaves, you're taking herbs that you're putting them into klisheni, that's not considered a tavlin, and that's a problem. You have to be careful from these herbal, some of the teas that are new age, which are not stam your cheaper teas that are ground leaves and they're right now Lipton. So in those cases, there is a process of cooking that's happening right then, and then it's not considered that not necessarily is it considered a tavlin, and therefore you need to do it in a kli shlishi. Now in terms, we consider it a tavlin. Someone wants to use honey. Honey, be'etzem, you are allowed to put it into klisheni. Why? Because according to the Alter Rebbe, it's a liquid, and it's brought in many different areas in halacha that mashke, that dvash is called a liquid. In Birks Hanenin, it's called a shahakal, it's called a liquid, and obviously in Tumah V'Tara, it's one of the shiva mashkin that are machsher kabel tumah, yad shachad dam, the dalad is dvash. So it's considered a liquid. However, this is dafke if it's a liquid. Then we said in a klisheni, the Alter Rebbe is matter all liquids. If it's a chunk, and not necessarily was it heated up before, if it was nizbashal earlier and you consider it a yavish, then that's one thing. But if it wasn't cooked before, and usually these chunk teas are not necessarily cooked before, then you cannot. So because if it's a liquid, liquid honey, you could add even a klisheni. And these things are I'll tell you when this is practical. This whole discussion is very practical. If you're preparing tea for a whole bunch of people, most people, they'll just pour from the chainik into a big bowl. You'll add honey for everybody, and then you have the ladle put into cups instead of putting into each cup and make your life simpler. And you're allowed to do it according to Alter Rebbe. We said sugar, we said milk, we said tea, and we said honey, but not cocoa and coffee. Now, it's kedai to point out the Mishnah Berurah doesn't consider it a tavlin, but the Alter Rebbe, it seems like most places can hold like the Alter Rebbe. I'm saying the Alter Rebbe for Lubavitch, most Lubavitch places can hold that it's considered a tavlin. You go to go there, Fakish as well. Now, again, it's nachal lahachmer. If the klisheni is very, very hot, so then that's a different story. There's places too. Now, another thing, yeah. Right. The Alter Rebbe considers it a lach. The chumrah of the Alter Rebbe, that something that dissolves right away is, even though now it looks yavish, it's going to be considered a lach already now because it dissolves right away. That will only tell us that you cannot consider it a yavish in bishul achar bishul. So you cannot put it into a kli rishon or pour from a kli rishon on it. But the fact that it's a lach, if we say in a kli sheni there's no bishul in liquid, in all liquids like the Alter Rebbe paskins, even if it was never cooked before, I don't care. Even if we don't consider the milk pasteurized to that degree and the milk wasn't pasteurized, period. Honey was never heated up. It's a lach. You could put it in a kli sheni according to Alter Rebbe, all liquids. Something you do need to be careful, and he's just fabulous. You have to be careful that when you're pouring out, if you're pouring the kli, regardless of bishul, you're pouring it out. If you have pieces on the bottom, you have to be careful from boirer. If you get too close to the end and it's pouring out of between the leaves, and when you're pouring from Turkish coffee and you want to get the whole coffee and you don't want the pieces in, and you run very close to the end, it's a real problem of boirer. You're not allowed to do that. So he said, yeah, so be careful of that. When it's not pouring, but rather it's slowly dripping out, you're not allowed to pour it. It's mamash is a boirer. Now we're going to talk about taking out the tea bag. Halacha l'maisa. The way they prepare, we said, but taking out the tea bag, and there's a problem of boirer psoyos mitachaychel. There are people that he brings is yesh matirin to take it out with a spoon because you're taking it together with some of the liquids, like a fly. If you're taking it together with liquid, and to take the cup of tea and to pour it out with the bag, and the rest, if it's done right before drinking, according to Alter Rebbe, is mutter. If it's right, if it's samach l'shtia, it's like it's boirer biyad, miyad, liyad, right? What's the het la'alter, right? The heter of boirer is if you're doing it biyad, you're doing it right la'alter, right before you're eating, and you're doing it oichel mitoch pseilas. So he says if you're pouring it out with some of the tea, and what you're holding in your hand is what you're going to drink, you could rely on that, but not if you're going too close to it. That means if you're pouring out a little bit of droplets together with, you have to be pouring, like pour it out, and then what you're holding in your hand is considered boirer oichel. You're holding it. We didn't discuss boirer in these shiurim, but I'm just going al seder here. The way he describes to prepare tea, what you have in your hand is the oichel, and you're planning to drink it right away, so it's la'alter, and you're doing it in biyad, not with a kli, and you're good to go. But if you're doing it the other way around, you're pouring out the tea and you're holding if you're pouring out the entire tea into a separate cup, that's what you want to drink. You're going to leave in this cup the tea bag. Listen closely. Again, if you have the tea bag in your teacup and you're pouring it, not you're yanking it out and the tea bag is going to go over there and you're keeping what you want to drink. Rather, you're pouring out what you're planning to drink in a second cup and you're going to leave this. This is usher according to the Alter Rebbe, because what you're holding in your hand, that's considered the boirer. This is it's as if you were mevara the psoilas. You took out the psoilas. What you're keeping in your hand is considered the psoilas, and then you were boyer psoilas biyad. It's not with a kli, but it's asur. That's okay. Then you weren't boyer anything. You're just drinking it together. That's okay. That's boyer. Right. It's interesting. It just so happens that in the last two halachas I mentioned, the Alter Rebbe is chaylik directly against the Mishnah Berurah. I'm saying the Alter Rebbe is way before the Mishnah, but I'm saying the Alter Rebbe, they paskin differently. The Alter Rebbe holds that what you're holding in your hand, that's the boirer. That's what you're taking out. And what's going into the second cup is the psoila. So if you're pouring out what you don't want, but you're keeping in your hand what you're going to drink, you're good to go. That specifically is usher according to the Mishnah Berurah, because he holds fakek. Where you're pouring it to, that's considered what you're being mevar. So you're pouring out the psoilas. According to the second scenario, according to the Alter Rebbe, that you're pouring it into a second cup, what you want to drink, and you're holding in your hand according to the Alter Rebbe, this is boirer, this is prime boirer, because what you're keeping in your hand is the psoilas. According to the Mishnah Berurah, forget this is mutter. Just funny. That's the best, right? Okay. Tea. Okay. Adding lemon to the tea. So, Bichlal, if you prepared before Shabbos, is the best. Leidach, if you there's place to be makel to take a piece of lemon and put it into a klisheni, and it's considered tavlin. And someone that does it, yesh la'al milismach, he brings all his maramekaimis in regards to considering a slice of lemon as a tavlin, even though it's mamish a pri. And last week we quoted the Chazanish that says to be machmer, new things to consider them to consider new things, not a tavlin. We shouldn't be machmer. But he says, and therefore you could put it into klisheni. However, there are those that are machmer. So therefore, you shouldn't put it. There are those that are machmer not to put in the slice of lemon into klisheni. But definitely, if you have it before Shabbos squeezed, then any mashkin you could put into klisheni. To squeeze out tea directly into tea is asur, period. And not only that, it's asur to do that even in cold water. The isur of schita. And there are those that learn that you come with a svara. Why? Because you're not allowed to do schita if you're soichet. The only heter to do schita, the loophole is if you do it onto oichel. If you do schita onto oichlin, called haba la yavish ki yavish. So it's as if you took. We don't look at it like liquid, the lemon. We look at it like being that it's going into pieces of salad. You're good to go. But if you're doing it into empty kli or into liquid, then it's asur. It's seichet. Here comes, again, I'm going to remind you the shit of the Alter Rebbe that we mentioned earlier. According to the Alter Rebbe, anything that dissolves will be considered a lach. Hence, there are those that are matir. There are many poskim that quote a phenomenal heter. You could squeeze lemon onto sugar and then add water, turn it into lemonade, or pour from a klisheni, and you're good to go. According to Alter Rebbe, being that sugar is going to dissolve, and therefore now already we consider it a mashka, that doesn't work, according to the Alter Rebbe. Okay, and therefore to do it over there are days that are matir this, but the Alter Rebbe is machmer based on the what we discussed earlier. Yeah. Doesn't help. To squeeze it out is a problem of soichet. Oh, so what do? Either you put in a piece of lemon that's allowed without squeezing. You just cut in a piece and put it in. And if it gets squeezed while it's inside, it's fine, because if it's not nicker, it's a different story. But right, they teach them. That's why we pay for seminary where we pay. I think we have to be paying for something. However, if it was already squeezed before Shabbos, lemon juice, you could pour it into klisheni, even according to the Alter Rebbe. Okay. I do want to point out something that is very, very important. There's tradition soups that many of them, you would assume you could pour in a cliche, you pour from a klisheni into it because it's yavish, it's dry, it's dry, right? You see it there. And the problem with that is that many poskim hold that is clearly mikale habishul. They are by definition. Why are they considered they're manot chamot, they're kal, whatever, they even have the name, they're instant. Their whole definition is they're cooked, so that there's no place to consider a tavlin. And not only that, it's beferish kale habishul, and therefore you can't pour from a kli rishon into them for sure not, because here kli rishon is going to be a problem. But even to put them into a klisheni is also, those little yeah. Irmi klisheni is a kli shlishi already. And oatmeal is the same deal. Oatmeal, instant oatmeal will also be considered kale habishul. Brewing, basically brewing coffee. So for sure, kli shlishi. There's another story of boirer with using a nap of uchvara. So that's already a question. I need to look into that. He brings over here that if these instant coffees were completely dried and you're just adding hot water, they were completely cooked, then you're allowed to put it in even to kli rishon lachar shosam or. But it's complicated. Right. He says instant potato, there's these potato flakes that you put in and you turn them into. That is a whole separate sugya, that puree that you have to be careful mitzad lisha, which is another sugya. That's the beauty of Hilchos Shabbos. They just dance with each other, one malacha and the next. It's like Givaldik. So that's why you have to tackle them all. So we focused on bishul. We focused a lot on. It's important to point out, according to the Alter Rebbe, I'm just going to put this out there. Another very interesting halacha. According to the Alter Rebbe, you can even pour from a kli rishon into a lot of cold water to cool it off and to warm it up. Tata gavar. The Alter Rebbe applies tata gavar, even though you would say irmi kli rishon is mevashel k'dei klipa, and some bishul happening. The Alter Rebbe goes at length in Shin Yud Ches to discuss that that's not an issue, and therefore to cool cold water to warm it up a little bit. And if you're not reaching Yatzel Ed's boy, then you're definitely good. You can do that. Okay.